Welcome to Nonprofit Nerd Impact Unleashed. Get ready to dive into the world of nonprofit leadership and sustainability, where the passion and unstoppable dedication of those making a real impact are celebrated. With your host, Jarrett Ransom, get ready to explore inspiring stories and game changing strategies of nonprofit leaders from across the sector. In this season, we're focusing on critical management challenges that are key to the long-term success of nonprofit organizations. Nonprofit Nerd Impact Unleashed is your go-to podcast for no-nonsense, in-depth conversations with the real-life superheroes of the nonprofit sector. Get ready to unleash your inner nerdiness and learn how to navigate and overcome the challenges that help build stronger, more sustainable organizations. Now, let's dive in and harness the collective power of our nonprofit networks to create lasting change.
Hey there, friends, and welcome back to another amazing episode of Nonprofit Nerd Impact Unleashed. Today, I'm bringing you a recent conversation that I had with Tucker Wannamaker. Tucker and I were introduced by a previous podcast guest in a previous season, I should say. So thank you and so much gratitude to you, Joey Goon of Utopia Experience. I really enjoyed Tucker's ability to have such an authentic conversation with me. We might have met as strangers, but throughout our conversation that you are about to hear, we quickly, and I'm going to add easily, connected over a lot of similar thoughts and lived experiences. In this conversation, you're going to hear Tucker open up and share about what's important to him, as well as his own experience with burnout as a leader in this sector. I think you're really going to like what he has to share with you today. And of course, a big shout out of gratitude to this season's podcast sponsors. Thank you, Bloomerang and Chazen. Your support in these conversations are greatly appreciated. Well, welcome back, my friends. I am so glad to have with us today Tucker, and Tucker's going to share a little bit about himself. But first, Tucker, I do think we should give a shout out of gratitude to Joey, because he's our common friend, our common connection, right? That made this introduction happen. So Joey, if you're listening, thanks, bud. We appreciate you.
Love you, Joey Goon. Great work, my friend. Yeah.
Yeah. So Tucker, welcome. Thanks for saying yes. So happy to have you join me today. And I'm thrilled to have our listeners learn more about you. And just as we kick off, I would love for you to do just that. Like, who are you? What do you do? How do you show up in this nonprofit space?
Yeah, well, so I'm the Chief Experience Officer of an organization called Thrive Impact. And why we're called Thrive Impact is actually because I once upon a time was a burned out nonprofit leader. And I had once upon a time started a marketing company, and we started doing work here in Colorado and then actually around the country too, around like activism based work and raising money for foundations and nonprofits. And I was just like really hooked on that work. I was like, I love this work. I want to do more of it. My wife and I and our 4 kids, we ended up moving to DC, really for adventure. And I ended up selling the company to go full time with one of our clients, which was an organization called character.org. And so ultimately worked at 3 different organizations inside of nonprofits. And a lot of what I was looking for was to create more positive change. And what I ended up finding was a whole lot of burnout. And so I had met a gentleman named Kevin Hagan. He was my co-founder with me, and he had just stepped down as the CEO of the American Diabetes Association. And we both had similar stories. And I came from sort of small, scrappy, nonprofit work, and he came from large institutional. And we had, again, very similar stories. And we're like, we need to do something about this. How do we go upstream with nonprofit leaders and help them to thrive so that they can have the impact that they set out to have and that their communities need from them? So, and since then, we've been around for about, it's either 7 or 8 years. I can't remember now. But we've really morphed into not just about nonprofit leadership, but actually more explicitly about impact-driven leaders, because we realize that in some ways, nonprofits, it's a tax status, not a business model. It's really just a legal status, and that there are so many different impact-driven leaders in the for-profit sector, in the government sector. And there are also some not very impact-driven leaders in the nonprofit sector. I've had one of my old bosses, in fact, who they weren't really about measuring that positive change. They weren't really about creating impact from the inside out. Because in particular, for one of my burnout stories, one of the situations that happened was it was an organization that had a vision for the world that didn't live into that vision on the inside. And as Fred Kaufman from the Conscious Business Institute at MIT says, that becomes no greater corruption of the organizational soul. And I felt that corruption. Yeah. Yeah. I see your face and like, whoo. Yeah. Well, I felt that corruption. But I also realized too, Jarrett, that in my own story around burnout, I had a lot of work to do on myself. I didn't know how I showed up. I didn't fully understand the impact of the work that that I was having, essentially, the influence I was having on the space around me. And so a lot of our work is really geared around what we call both co-creative leadership, which is how to help organizations be much more co-creative in nature and creating more bottom-up approaches to their strategies, doing various things like that. But also conscious leadership, which is to grow in your awareness of your influence, because that was a big part of my own burnout, in that I didn't fully understand. I had too much idealism and not enough realism, which I think we need to hold those in balance together. I was not very aware, frankly, of myself as a male in the space that I was in. And I was just kind of going along doing my thing. I also didn't realize how much anxiety I actually had and how much that was, permeating throughout, because when I'm in reactivity, I now know that, now that I've grown in this understanding, I'm now creating reactivity in others, and that creates a downward spiral across the whole organization. So those are some of the reasons why I'm here.
Oh, can we just let that sink in, right? Like, thank you. And also double shout out to Joey, because he knew exactly the kind of conversations I love to get into.
That's great.
Super rich conversation already, Tucker. Thank you so much. And I have experienced burnout. I've also experienced that corruption. So yes, if you're a listener watching on YouTube, you're going to see my facial reactions. I can count 3, right? And I've been in the sector 20 plus years. I have worked with 3 different organizations that their mission did not align internally. How they treated their people, how they treated their staff, their team, their volunteers, their board members, their stakeholders was not in alignment. So I'm certainly going to go back to, this podcast and listen to, the name that you mentioned, the quote that you shared, because I have been there, and probably some of our listeners have too. And just to have that, I think, spoken out loud, to have that spoken in community, to have that awareness and realization, chef's kiss. So yeah, thanks for going there.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's ultimately, it goes even, like, I love how you said it's a lack of alignment. And I totally agree with you on that. It's also a lack of integrity, and I realized I've been out of integrity myself. And, it's been interesting even, growing and working within Thrive Impact for the last 7 years. It's been fascinating to have Thrive Impact in my face all the time, because, I remember when I worked at character.org, actually, this was the first time that on my business card, it said character. And I was like, gosh, do I have character? Am I full of character? Am I representative of character?
What kind of character?
Yeah, exactly. And so it's been fascinating to have Thrive Impact on this work. It was interesting. I think it was probably about 2 years ago. At that time, I was the CEO. I'm not the CEO anymore. I'm the Chief Experience Officer, which is delightful and wonderful. But at that time, we were going through some pretty significant revenue challenges. Now, one of the frameworks we talk about around co-creative leadership is that we come from a world where we believe, or we have the paradigm or think that a leader's job is to have the answers. Like, if you're the leader, you're the few who have the answers. And that's what leadership is your job is to have the answers. Well, the speed of change is happening at such an exponential rate right now, and even more so, it continues to grow. The speed and the complexity of change happening so fast with recent administration, with artificial intelligence, and just overall, the speed of change has been getting faster and faster, and is not changing. That speed is going to continue to change or happen that way. Well, based upon that speed, that whole methodology around being the few who have the answers is actually growing ever more and more irrelevant as a leadership style. But here I am, right? I literally teach on this stuff, and we had this revenue challenge, and I start shame spiraling, right? I start going like, why can't I figure this out? What's wrong with me? Maybe I'm not the right person for this job, right? Imposter syndrome, like, and just like spiraling down. And I literally just before that had a training on co-creative leadership, which uses that framework I just talked about, right? Which is that our job as leaders is not to be the few who have the answers. It's to engage the many in the power of great questions. It's to co-create our futures. Well, so here I am suddenly, and something dawned on me. And, sometimes it just takes these moments where, wait, I'm spiraling into this downward spiral of shame when what I didn't fully realize it, but deep down, I was believing the lie that I was trying to help others recognize in themselves. And so it took me a little while, but I didn't realize how deep it was. And when I say shame spiral, I mean like I felt shame. Like
Yeah.
I can't figure this out. Something's wrong with me. I mean, talk about scarcity, talk about like, I'm not enough. I mean, all that was starting to spiral. And then once it dawned on me that this is what was really happening within my body and within my whole like understanding, man, I remember the meeting that I had with our team, and I was outside my backyard. It was a beautiful day in May, and I just start weeping because of how deep this was. And I just said, because revenue issues affect the whole team, right?
Yeah.
And also on top of that, not co-creating also affects the whole team by continuing to go off into my like isolated leadership cave and try to figure out the answers. And so I just started like it was something that needed to break in me, and I just started weeping, which is like kind of uncomfortable and kind of vulnerable, in front of a team that you've worked with. But that's how real like Thrive Impact to me is like, wait, I need to figure out how to thrive myself. And I continue to do that a lot. But that was a story for me that was just so real, that I'm not thriving because I'm believing old beliefs. I'm holding on to old paradigms. They're actually making me more isolated, which ultimately leads to more shame. I mean, isolation is killer, killer, killer for us. There's the um, recent like a year and a half ago from the Surgeon General that talked about the epidemic of loneliness, and how loneliness
Yes.
is more deadly for us than I think it was smoking 25 cigarettes a day. Loneliness
Hmm.
is toxic to growth. It is toxic to learning. It is toxic to thriving. It is toxic to creating positive change, which is why we're all probably here. And so that's where I was just like, whoa, this is real. I need to open up. I need to co-create and not feel like my job is to have the answers all the time. So that's how it hits me in a very deep, real way, and as a personal learner on this journey too.
Yes, and I am holding on to every word you say. First of all, I'm a huge Brene Brown fan, and I feel like I'm hearing
Yeah.
a lot of Brene through you, right? Through the
Yeah, she's great.
masculine voice. Um, I'm very aware of like my own shame spirals, and I just want to say to you, Tucker, thank you, because what you're sharing so openly and vulnerably, right? Like again, it touches me in such a powerful, impactful way, and I'm sure for so many of our listeners. And then I just want to say, as a man, and I'm assuming white male, I mean that's what I'm seeing,
Yeah.
is the privilege that you have to change that story for yourself, to model it, as you said, to your 4 children and the community at large, not to mention your partner in life, right? And so I just commend you, like give you kudos for all of that. And I love it, right? And no, I'm on this journey with you, right? Like I always say to people, like if you if you want to have a question, or if you want to have a conversation rather with me, like get ready to go in the deep end of the pool, because I don't stay in the shallow very long.
Yeah.
All
Well,
right.
because
Like
the
I
deep
just want
end's
to go.
where the stuff happens, right? That's what's
Yes, it's
really
where it
going down.
happens. That's yeah, it's where we connect, it's where we grow, it's where we, can change and see those paradigms, all of what you said. So again, super rich in the conversation of leadership. All of this drives into sustainability. You've already brought some of this up into the stories that you've shared with us. I'm really curious, like how how do you define your leadership style today? And what I hear from the beautiful stories you've shared, the raw, rich, authentic stories, Tucker, is that you have evolved your own leadership style over your career. Is that an accurate statement?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. I sometimes
Yeah.
joke to say I'm a recovering strategist. Because because I was so head focused and like, coming up with the answers. And ultimately what I've since realized and I'm still healing from quite literally is this sense of performance. Like instead of being about learning and growing, it's this actually comes from the work of Peter Senge, and he coined the term learning organization. And he was quoting his mentor, which is a guy named W. Edwards Deming, who was one of the head guys at Toyota, and that really built sort of the world famous innovative culture of Toyota. And Deming said,
Yeah.
the prevailing system of management is destroying our people because it's about control and not about learning. And Peter goes on to hit on that a little bit more. And he's like, and that started when we were all 6 years old and we all went to probably the same school. He's talking, it's a great video. You should look it up on YouTube. Peter's talking to this room full of educators. It's back in the 90s. And so he has this like long tie and awkward 90s suit. It's great. Um, he's talking to this room full of educators and he
And
said, how,
thin. It was a thinner tie, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
not fat.
probably.
It's like
Yeah.
thin.
And, and he said to these room of educators, how many of you knew about learning before you went to school? Like, what a fascinating question to ask a group of educators. And, and at first you kind of see the crowd's like, oh, what an interesting question. And he said, yeah,
Yeah.
of course you did. Because it was a learning process from the moment you came out of the womb, right? It's been learning ever since. And what was it about? What was learning about back then before you went to school? And so we started unpacking that. What did that really mean? What did that look like? It was about learning by doing. It was learning by trying. I remember when my 2-year old Ella, at the time she was 2, she's now 12, but at the time she started learning how to ride a bike when she was 2. And my daughter, my oldest daughter, Addison, was kind of her coach of sorts. She was 8, I think. And so, but the way that Ella learned how to ride the bike was by riding the bike. And she did scrape her knee. She did fall down. She did fail. And then she also had Addie kind of helping guide and was a coach and a thoughtful like leader in a sense for that. But ultimately it was about her getting on the bike and putting it out there in a sense, getting out there and doing. And the invigorating part of that and the frustrating part of that. And then so Peter goes on to say, well, and then we all went to school at about 6 years old. We probably went to the same school, generally speaking. And we realized quickly that school was not about learning. It was much more about performance for somebody else's approval. Now where are the answers now that we're in school? They're not necessarily in you doing, they're in somebody else telling you whether you're right or wrong. And he just goes on to explain a little bit more about the shift from like before school to when we went to school. And then he says, going back to that quote about the prevailing system of management, is there's no difference between a teacher and a teacher and a student and a boss and a subordinate. And that we just have this more control-based environment that ultimately is, I mean, and W. Edwards Deming uses a very strong word, which is destroying. That's really strong. And when I watched that video quite a few years ago, it just really sunk in that what we're talking about here is not some nice leadership development concepts. We're actually talking about healing from deep trauma within the system and giving people a how, and not only a new paradigm, but a new how, these simple, practical ways for people to really create more sustainable leadership and sustainable organizations in the first place. And I think that's what keeps coming up for me around this work.
So the word Thank you for that. The word performance really stood out to me. That's something that I struggle with.
Yeah.
Not that I don't do it. I perform almost at light speed. And
Yeah.
that is what puts me to the edge of burnout, right? Exhaustion. I was meeting with my therapist, and just really defining my work style is I'm a workhorse, I'm a high achiever, I am performance driven. And some of that probably comes from my scarcity mindset or my
Mm,
deep negative belief of my value is not enough, right? I'm not worthy enough. And therefore I overperform, I outperform even my
hmm
own self day to day. And as you mentioned, AI and technology stacks, right? Like there is so much right now that allows us to perform at a level that we've never performed before.
Yeah.
And so my question to you, Tucker, and it's really more of a personal question, how do
Sure.
you balance, right, that word performance when now we have so many tools, resources to allow us to perform at a greater speed for a longer period of time?
Mm. Well, that's a great question, Jarrett. As you were sharing a little bit about your story, I was thinking, when you're in that performance mode, where do you feel it in your body? Have you ever asked yourself that question before? Where do you notice it
Oh, yeah.
in your body? Like
Yeah.
I had this situation where I had a coach, a dear friend of mine named Aaron, who really helped me to unlock and unpack something. And he was like, he said, Tucker, when we talk about relationships, your energy goes up. You have a lot of energy, right? And when you work on relationships, like you just love it. When we talk about revenue, energy tanks. He was noticing the energy that came out of me, and so he sort of walked me through this process. It's actually based in a methodology called internal family systems, or parts work is another way of calling it. Great book, No Bad Parts, by a guy named Dr. Richard Swartz. Super deep end. If you want to go in the deep end, Jarrett, like great, fantastic, fascinating book.
Yeah.
The audiobook is even better because he actually has some examples that he literally walks people through on a podcast. It's fascinating. But to answer your question around performance is, to me, performance is actually a state of reactivity that I'm in because I'm trying to like prove something. Performance to me is not like I'm able to be a great facilitator, which is what I do a lot, right? It's less of like my ability to perform or do something with excellence. It's when I'm noticing what's going on within me and I'm realizing that this is anxiety driven and anxiety based and not based in being in integrity to who I'm meant to be and what I'm supposed to be doing. And so to me, the word performance, it's a little bit tough because like, we work with organizations on things like performance reviews. What does that even mean? When we talk about in our podcast, me and our former chief of impact did a podcast about accountability. And it's like this word that's like brings up, when I say the word accountability, what do people feel? Do we feel our nervous systems activated to where our sympathetic nervous system is in overdrive, which is our stress response, right? And so those are the things that to me it's a little more nuanced to who I am and what's going on within me. And this is where conscious leadership comes into play, which is, am I aware of what's happening within me? Am I aware that when I'm in performance, and what performance means to me is I'm operating from a state of anxiety or a state of proving to somebody like I need to show them, or no, anytime I go on the stage, especially in front of a large crowd, like I'm gonna get nervous and I might have a little anxiety per se, but I still need to go up and I need to go and show up. And so part of this process is learning how to just be not in a state of anxiety, not in a state of reactivity, but operating from a state of creativity. And I'm using reactive and creative. This actually comes out of Leadership Circle, who's done a ton of Leadership 360 is a great organization. I've actually had a Leadership 360 done on me. It's what it feels like from their platform. But reactivity versus creativity, these are two different qualities of leadership. Creativity is not for like those who work at marketing companies or like the graphic designers. Creativity are things like self-awareness, creativity-based leadership. So there's certain leadership qualities that creativity-based leaders are able to be within, and that's not in a state of reactivity. So I think that's what I think about around performance is a lot of it to me is a more personal, like, am I in scarcity? Am I operating from my own anxiety? Do I even know what's there? Have I even found awareness and am I able to even notice what is there so that then I can consciously choose how to move forward? So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but that's performance is an interesting word that for me, it's something I actively consciously think about how I'm continuing to heal from. Hence, like the Peter Senge and the W. Edwards Deming quote of performance for somebody else's approval and the prevailing system of management about control, not about learning, and things like that.
Right. Yeah. No, you definitely, for me, at least you answered the question. I'm sure our listeners are like, I'm going to listen to this again, Tucker. I want to connect with you, all the things. Um, yeah, I agree. And to pause to even have that awareness, right? Like, and I will speak for myself, get so caught up in performance and checking things off my box and feeling like I had like, yeah, I had a really productive day, right?
Yeah.
But then did I pause enough in my day to feel, to have that awareness, to allow that um, opportunity to engage and check in with my body? Or have I just gone into robot mode where I am a doer? For anyone who really wants to know what I'm really diving into my therapy, it's doership,
Yeah.
right? It's how do I get out of doership?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I operate in a masculine energy 99% of the time,
Mm.
and I'm a doer. And so really, I do feel it. And that is a question because I'm going through trauma-based therapy. And I feel it,
Yeah.
first of all, I feel it in my chest, right? And then
Mm.
I feel all the stress points.
Yeah.
And, and just working on some somatic release, but my
Oh,
jaw
that's
is a
great.
big one. I have
Mm.
TMJ. So like
Yeah.
clenching and just keeping this, tension. Um,
Mm.
I'm going to say my massage therapist loves me, but I'm not sure if she does or if she just like sees me too often.
Yeah, right, right.
So yeah. So thank you. I appreciate you answering that. I know this conversation went completely off script, but that's what we were committed to, is having a real, super authentic riff conversation. And I'm just so grateful, Tucker. I have two more questions for
Sure.
you. The first one, right? How can people learn more about you as well as Thrive Impact? Where should we go?
Oh, sure. Just go to thriveimpact.org. And you can look me up on LinkedIn, Tucker Wannamaker. There's no other Tucker Wannamakers in the world, apparently, at least based on Google, I think. So you can look up Tucker Wannamaker, two N's, and
Yeah.
just connect with me. If you want to learn a little bit more about our work or about me, those are the best ways to do that.
Fantastic. And then a key takeaway. Is there anything you would like to leave our leaders, and yes, listening to this to know today? And I always say, I see everyone as a leader, right? We all are
Yeah.
leaders and how we show up. So I use that for every single person, regardless of age, regardless of title. So yeah, any
Yeah, I
final
agree
say?
too.
Yeah.
Well, I think practically, I think there are some things that organizations and leaders are able to do. One of the core frames in our conscious leadership work comes from my dear mentor, Dr. Daniel Friedland. And Jarrett, you can see it behind me, which is pause, notice, and choose. Is that if we want to get out of reactivity, pause, there's a physiology of our breath, literally using our breath. Your mom had great wisdom when she said, take a deep breath, because when we take
Yeah.
deeper belly breaths or diaphragmatic breaths, it activates a nerve, which activates our parasympathetic nervous system, which allows our nervous system to start to get into a place where we can actually process what's going on. And so pausing, using your breath. And by the way, we do this with organizations. Like at the beginning of meetings, we continue to encourage, hey, just invite breath. This isn't some woo stuff. It's physiological. it's real. Like it's, and we know, Jarrett, you and I know this. Nonprofit leaders need real stuff that work, right? They're in the trenches of real human. Like when I think about my friend Beth, who's in the trenches with people who are recovering from homelessness and addiction, she needs real things that actually work with human beings, not these out there elusive, ethereal, like if we just go right. Now, some of that could be true, who knows? But to me, this stuff works because it works because it's like literally a physiological thing. So when we take deep belly breaths, we breathe in slowly through our nose for 4 counts, and we breathe out for 8 counts. In fact, this is a breath practice that the Navy SEALs use called Prolex breathing, which is breathing in for 2 counts, holding for a little bit, and then breathing out for 8 counts really slowly. And that's when you're in acute stress situations, like, when your boss says something and you just feel that nervous system rise up. That's your sympathetic nervous system, sending cortisol through your system, which is a stress hormone.
Yeah.
So I think there's really practical steps that you can take around pausing, which is using your breath, noticing, which is observing without judgment. What is happening? What do you notice is happening? And being curious, open, and kind to what's happening within you and what may be happening with your boss. And then choosing, which is what is your most appreciative approach? What is the approach that you can take that does not harm yourself or others, and that can actually build relationship? My old mentor, Dr. Danny, used to say his question was things like, "What matters most now?" He would ask the question. It's a way of creating space between that stimulus that is creating that activation within us, and then that response. Instead of it being reactive, it can be responsive. And as an old mentor once said, it's foolishness to react and it's wisdom to respond. And so, how do we pause, notice, and then choose? And really, that's a muscle. Like I learned that many years ago, and I still continue to practice that. I did it yesterday with my wife, who's also our CEO at this point. And where we were in reactivity, and I could see it. Okay, I need to take a moment and just pause. And can we pause? She invited me to pause with her. We can use these types of practical steps to start to get into a place where we can actually move forward around things that are most important to us, which typically are relationships, creating positive change in a sustainable way. And so that's a practical step that hopefully people can think about trying.
Love it. Thank you. Tucker Wannamaker, thank you so much. I think you're going to have a flood of LinkedIn connections.
Sure.
And I'm also going to Google, like, is there another Tucker Wannamaker out there? So yeah,
I'm so
I
curious.
always
Maybe
say the
there
same
is.
thing. I know for Jarrett, I'm like, I'm the only female Jarrett Ransom out there, but yeah, I still to this day, I believe it is. Tucker, thank you. Phenomenal, rich, real conversation. Just what I love. The next time I'm in Denver, I'm going to hit you up and
That'd be great.
yeah, would love to be connected. Thanks for
Cool.
sharing your authentic self.
Awesome. Thanks, Jarrett.